Yo, YouTube, what's going on? It's your boy Salvation Elite. We are back with another video, guys, and today, man, it's the first roster move, the first big roster move of the Call of Duty League. So, as you guys can tell from the title, from the thumbnail, from everything else, why you clicked on this video is because Enable got benched by the Seattle Surge, and they've got their replacement. They've got their new starting lineup. Obviously, you could debate, like, okay, yeah, Toronto, they benched Metals, but like we all knew that Toronto's gonna be messing up their rosters all the time and trying out and experimenting new combinations. But this one is a pretty big change of a big name in the Call of Duty League with Enable. So we've got a lot to talk about with how this affects the Call of Duty League moving forward. So let's get into it. So last night on stream, Enable announced that he's officially been benched. But first, here's the clip.
How was my week? How was scrims? Midnight.
I just got nominated captain.
We have not scrimmed. I actually got benched
Yeah, but come on, Brad.
for the time
Game of the
being.
week.
So I think
Brad,
they're
I'm
starting
team of the week.
up
You can still pick me though, maybe. Brad, you want first pick?
tomorrow, maybe. I don't know.
So, you know, Enable did say they're like for the time being, and he said that they were going to be scrimming tomorrow, which is now today as you're watching this. So when he first announced this, we weren't actually sure who was going to be replacing him in the starting lineup. The most likely two options were Proto and Pandur, who were on the academy team for the Seattle Surge. So now Pandur has been moved to the starting lineup. And I'm sure a lot of you are probably wondering, who is Pandur? So interestingly enough, the only other big name team he's been on was Luminosity back in IW with Slacked, Classic, and Octane. So it only makes sense that now he finds his way back into a starting lineup with Octane and Slacked on the same team. So that might be the ties and how that ended up working out. That was the Paris Open back in 2017, and they got top 12 there, so not an ideal finish for him. But in CoD World War II, Pandur was on Ghost Gaming for basically the whole year with like Mox before he went to Gen G, got RX, Parasite, Lacefield. So, you know, he's been around the scene for a long time, and of course he's played with a lot of different pros in different situations, but not that many times in big time starting lineups on really talented teams. It'll be really interesting to see what ends up happening here with Pandur. So when it comes to Enable, at some point Seattle had to make a change. So that's the unfortunate situation with how they played. So obviously Seattle's currently 1-4 in the league with their only win coming against the LA Guerillas. They've lost to Dallas twice. They've lost to the Mutineers and the Toronto Ultra. So they're definitely a bottom 5 team right now in performance, which is really unfortunate. There's just a lot of things wrong with this roster. They've been losing them in pretty close fashion for the most part, but they've been really bad in Search and Destroy. Basically, their only good game mode is Domination. You have to attribute a lot of that to Octane because he's just so dominant on the map and can control a map better than anybody else. Really, like looking back at Karma's interview from London now, he makes a lot of sense. He was in a really good mood. He was talking about how they had a lot to improve. He was asked if they were going to get better, and he said he wasn't sure. He really didn't know, which was a really weird answer for Karma at the time. But now that they've made a roster change, I mean, it kind of makes sense why he was thinking in that direction now, because who really knows how it's going to work with Pandur? If you're a Seattle fan, I can understand the hesitancy or not being too excited about this. I mean, Pandur in his career hasn't shown that much upside at this point, but he's been a pretty good teammate and in the open bracket been pretty successful. In Minnesota, his team, Seattle's Academy, Hybrid Gaming, got 4th in the tournament, and they've won 2K, and they've gotten 2nd in another. So they've been successful this year in the AM scene. He's definitely a solid player, but it's hard to tell how good he actually is. I mean, at the end of the day, Seattle was pushed back into a corner where they either had to make a move with Slacked or with Enable. I think a lot of people are really surprised that it wasn't Slacked and Enable instead. So the real question is, what happens with Enable now, and where does Seattle go from here? So let's talk about Seattle first, and then talk about some options that Enable might have down the road. So it sounds like Seattle might just be testing out this roster with Pandur. It may not be like an official move yet, where Pandur would actually play multiple events with them. Probably debatable at this point whether or not Enable will be able to make it happen. I mean, Enable's handled this really well, really professionally, and so I really respect that about him, where he's not making too big of a deal about being benched, even though he's the first player in the CoD League to be benched, which is definitely really rough. I think Seattle's going to experiment with this, see if it works, maybe play one event with Pandur, see how it goes. But I'm not convinced this is a long-term fix. It feels like they're going to either have to bring somebody in or make a trade in some way to really stabilize this roster. I mean, they tried the experiment with Slack, Karma, and Enable all on the same team, and that was everybody's biggest worry with this team going into the year, was whether or not they'd have enough slaying power to be a good respawn team with 3 guys who are relatively not known for their slaying power, especially recently, with Karma, Enable, and Slacked. And Enable in his career has been known not to be great at Search and Destroy. In some games he's been decent, or in some games he's been, you know, maybe even good, but for the most part in his career, he hasn't been good in search. Obviously, KD's not everything, but he dropped a 0.84 at London. I mean, Slacked wasn't too much better at a 0.86, and Karma had a 0.91, but man, it was just a rough situation for Enable. Either Enable or Slacked were going to take the hit there, and apparently the team just chose with Enable. So where does Enable go from here? I mean, first of all, there's still a good chance that he ends up back in a starting roster on Seattle. That's definitely an option. If it doesn't work out with Pandur, they bring Enable back in. Maybe they then give Slacked the boot and see what happens. I don't know. I'd be surprised if that's the case, but really anything's possible. The other option is a potential trade that they could be looking at with another team. Right off the top of the head, the first team that comes to mind is OpTic Gaming. If they want to move on from JCap and you send Enable down there to replace JCap, it's definitely an upgrade in that sense. And of course, you got the 100T thing going on where Enable played with Slacked and Kenny last year, so there's definitely those connections there. And I think overall, Enable will be pretty comfortable in a situation like that on OpTic, and he'd be back in LA with the Oak Boys. So, you know, it would all be lined up for Enable. I think that would make a lot of sense. I don't know if trading something that Seattle's looking to do, or if that's where OpTic wants to go with it. You know, there's a lot of questions there, but that's definitely a possibility as well. So we'll have to see what ends up happening. It seems like OpTic would be the best bet for a trade. I don't know if anybody else would be really down to take Enable at this point, unless Enable's interested in going to like the Guerillas or Toronto maybe, or something like that. We'll definitely keep you updated on the situation. We'll be talking all about this even more in depth on the Best of 3 podcast next Tuesday and everything else. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, like, comment, favorite, subscribe. I really, really do appreciate it. I'm trying to do this long term, and I cannot do that without you guys, so I really do appreciate it as always. I'm your voice of Abezy, and we'll see you next time.